Settle. That's good. Hi there. Thanks for coming. It's really cool to see so many people coming to the free-to-play track. As you will come to learn, it's something that I'm really passionate about, so it's always good to see more. Who's doing free-to-play currently? Who wants to do free-to-play? And who hates free-to-play? All right, that's good. Let's change some hearts and minds today. Yeah, cool. So today I really want to talk about just some lessons that we've learned at free-to-play and how we approach it at Mighty Kingdom. It's really mostly related through the experience of us as a small and mid-sized studio. I think if you're a huge company with a lot of resources, then maybe less relevant to you, but hopefully still interesting. And it's really just about how we can keep the customer front of mind from every single process of game making. So right from the game that we're going to make in the first place through to supporting that game through its entire life cycle. So who am I? I'm Ella. I'm a product manager at Mighty Kingdom. I've worked on a few free-to-play games. As you can see, there's like a common theme on some of these icons. We have a license for the Shopkins brand. Shopkins are a toy brand run out of Melbourne here by Moose Toys. Really popular brand. And we're very fortunate that we get to partner with Moose. And through that, we've been able to reach 25 million users and have a really good understanding of that audience over the sort of 2.5 years we've been doing this. Most of what I'm going to be talking about today is going to be related through the experience we've had making Shopkins World Vacation, which is a free-to-play bubble shooter, aimed at this core Shopkins audience of sort of kids 6 to 10, but also at a secondary audience of women over 30. And we developed it in 14 weeks with a team of 10. These days, we've released it on the 1st of June, and we run what I would describe as like fairly lean live operations. So it's myself, a full-time level designer, because that's really key. We want to have as much content as we can pumping out at all times. And a part-time programmer, and we really bring on QA and art as needed. So why free-to-play? Why am I just assuming that customer-driven design is going to be free-to-play? Why do we focus so much of our time and energy on free-to-play? This is a graph of revenue for one of our premium Shopkins products, Shopkins Run. We released that in December, so like Christmas time last year. And this is the same time period, the same revenue scale for Shopkins World. So obviously a few things to notice there. Shopkins Run had that kind of like peak, what I like to call a trampoline launch, went really high and then crashed back down pretty quickly. But yeah, you can see that it kind of hit that long tail of revenue pretty quickly. And that's really good because we can sort of plan our cash flow really, really effectively there. But you can see Shopkins World hasn't really had that issue. It's consistently maintained a much higher level of revenue over time. The other thing there, that you can see that red line, that's Google Play revenue. So really we've opened ourselves up to an entirely new market there just by being free to play. Also, Shopkins Run was able to hire or continuously employ 5 people during its development period, and pretty much there's maybe like one programmer who'll jump on with bug fixes to Shopkins Run as needed. We have done 1 or 2 updates, but that's very few and far in between. Meanwhile, Shopkins World, pretty much since we started working on it, has consistently employed a team of 10 over the course of the product. Also, what's really important to note is that we would not have been able to afford to make Shopkins Run without the revenue from Shopkins World. So it's really allowed us to grow our business. And why do I care so much about this? Anyone who met me last night and had a conversation with me about free-to-play is probably already aware of this, but I really, really passionately believe that a big independent, or ideally multiple big independent studios making free-to-play games is vitally important for the Australian games ecosystem. It's so important that we have as many companies as we can operating at the scale that's necessary to make free-to-play games really effective. The other thing, I mean, that's really awesome, but I also think that there's a few other sort of hidden benefits there. Obviously, as I said, there's a lot of extra stuff that goes into free-to-play that I'll go into now, later, but that kind of stuff is things like hiring an economist to look at our game economies, having a psychologist to think about our behavioral economics. And it's really bringing people who wouldn't really think about a game career into the games industry and really diversifying the type of people we have in games. But my favorite thing is, because it's so difficult and because we have to do it at scale, what it really does is it equips our employees with the knowledge, the necessary knowledge in a really safe environment to understand mobile games, understand free-to-play. And then they can go out and make their own companies and make their own free-to-play games and really contribute to that ecosystem in a really, really economic way. One of my favorite examples of is Rovio. We all know them. And this is really true for the Finnish game industry in general. But like, this is only some of the great companies that are killing it in mobile that have come out of Rovio after having worked in a really mobile-focused mindset at Rovio. The other thing I want to talk about is a lot of what I'm going to say today is about being customer-driven, but I really want to stress that that is customer-informed, not customer-decided. We're not sort of just taking what they're saying and applying it verbatim to our games. We have to really, we all know what happens when we do that. So it's really, we've got to take everything, really have a wide view set, and that's because that's really where our skill comes in, right? It's our ability to understand this and apply it to our game. I'm also going to talk about revenue a lot. I don't necessarily think that's the be-all and end-all, although I do like it because it means that we get to work with lots of really amazing people. But I really like it because it's a really good indicator of what people value. People spend on what they value. So we have to be thinking about that and the market and where people are putting their money. And I'm also going to be talking about data in a more sort of analytical sense. I think that there's a lot of, there's customer reviews, lots of, YouTube reviews, all that kind of stuff, influencers and things. But really, when we look at the data, it allows us to sort of, number one, truly understand our players because we're understanding their behavior as opposed to what they're saying. Often those two things are a little bit maybe misaligned. But it really allows us to sort of give our customers a voice. Is what they're saying. We can listen to them. It's not practical to go out and interview every single one of our players. We have to look at their behavior on a much wider scale. So if we want to be really customer focused from the get-go, what we really need to do is look to the market and look what our customers are already doing. That's really, really key, I think, because we're going to learn a lot about people's behavior through a lot of where they're spending money. So how do we do that? It's a little bit more difficult these days. iOS 11 has taken that sort of one tap away, top grossing charts away. But there's plenty of companies out there trying to combat that, still give us some business intelligence about where people are spending their money. And even though it might not be down to the dollar, I think for our purposes, it's still really helpful. And you can see that every single one of those games in the US top grossing charts on iOS is free to play. So we see that that's what people are valuing. They're valuing that free to play experience. They're happy to spend their money in that. So if the market is informing our assumptions, we still need to validate them with our actual players. So that's why we got to ship it just as quickly as possible. Let's get to a playable state as soon as possible so that we can create that data that we're using to understand our players. Because that really lets us iterate. We get to have a chance to change what we're doing and understand what we're doing. At Mighty Kingdom, I like to really approach this with what I call the data loop. So really what we're doing is we're taking that data, whether that be market data, actual hard playable data. Maybe we have gone out and found one or two players with a prototype. And then we analyze it, and from there we can make a decision because we're using our expertise to to really come up with what to do next. And then most importantly is that action. We have to get those changes out into the market with an action. And that creates more data, and we get to do it again and again and again and again. And we learn so much from that. But I think what I really like about this, and why I try and approach like what I try and do with the products at Mighty Kingdom, is that it allows us to really focus and stay focused on the customer. Because if we're looking at that data and we're analyzing and segmenting out what we're looking at, we can be really focused, as opposed to like, oh, how does the game feel? What is it? You know, what are these? All of these metrics telling me. We can be really focused. My favorite example of this in action is the Peak Games Toy Blast. This is their top grossing chart performance from April to January. So you can see here, you know, kind of middling a bit. Really hit their stride later on. And then sort of, you know, July 2016 really started to consistently be hitting in that sort of top 10 games. This is all games on the App Store, by the way. But what I love about this is that it shows such a consistent and careful relationship with their users. Their users are telling them, what you're doing is working, the changes you're making are working because I'm paying money in your game, I want to stay in this game. But look at all the updates they had. That's 45 iterations of that loop. That's 45 points of data they've taken and said, how can we make a better decision? I think that's what's really important, is that they're looking at it from a decision-making point of view, or that's how I like to look at it. But it really, what it's doing is it's not necessarily helping us make better decisions. What it's doing is helping us identify the bad ones. So every single update, they're pulling out those bad decisions and leaving the great decisions, so they can incrementally move up and increase the value of their product for their users. So really each line represents fewer bad decisions. And the gap between each line, this is equally important, the gap between each line is a bad decision in the market. We want to get rid of those as soon as possible. So the longer those gaps are, the longer your bad decisions are impacting your customers. So if we tighten the loop, then we can really tighten that bad decision gap. And it really mitigates our risk. The risk of having a product in the market that's not working is, I mean, anyone who's been doing free-to-play knows that it really impacts that churn. And it is really risky to do free-to-play these days. We're living in a world of $10 cost per install cost. That's what some companies are willing to pay to get the users. That could be our users. So how can we possibly compete in that market? I think really it's let's use our size to our advantage. Others can wear that risk. I think if we can use the market data that they generate, we can really understand what's working for them and just take the best or the fewer worst decisions, take the great decisions and help that inform what we do. So I think we should pick one thing about our game and really make sure that we nestle that one unique selling point in a protective layer of all these great decisions from the market. Make sure it's proven. Everything about our game should have a proven market example that is working, and then we can make our game great with our great one thing. So we're only taking a risk on one thing. Yeah, it's risky to go into free-to-play, but if we're only making one risk, then it's much less risky than 6 other things that aren't proven. So even though Shopkins World Vacation and the Shopkins brand in general really allows us to mitigate a lot of our risk because we have a proven brand, we know that people like Shopkins. It still does come with some risks. So here for the World Vacation release, we were going to have a hard release date of June 1st. That was non-negotiable for us because there was going to be toys in the market saying download Shopkins World Vacation. If a child gets a toy and tries to find that game and can't find it, it damages our relationship with them, but it also damages our relationship with our licensing partner. There was also going to be more toys that came out after June 1st. So we really needed to have a proven monetization strategy in our game that was going to allow us to sustain the production of that game and really support all that new stuff and reflect that in the game later down the line. Economics of free-to-play tell us we need to have a wide appeal. I needed something that was going to be easy to pick up and play as our core mechanic. It had to appeal to Shopkins fans, that's also non-negotiable, but I really wanted to appeal to the secondary audience that I see as their parents. So if parents are playing it, number one, they're also more likely to spend. They've got much more disposable income than their children. But also, it really helps create that trust between the parent and the child. The parent and me when the child is playing. So if a parent's happy to play that game, they're also going to be happy to have, if they're in that game, they're going to be happy that they're confident about what their child is playing. And the sort of secondary bonus task I set for myself is I really wanted to create some new IP for Mighty Kingdom that we could use, possibly reskin for an own original IP free-to-play game. So I was really fortunate that we actually had some hard market data about what our audience liked. So we show ads in Shopkins World, and we noticed that consistently Bubble Witch 3 Saga was the first place to ad. It was winning the waterfall every time. And that kind of proved that there was something that our audience liked, because advertisers were willing to spend on our audience. They were clearly seeing some value from it. Whilst that was kind of a risky decision, because we had 10 people for 14 weeks to make a linear bubble shooter game, I was kind of happy to take that risk because I knew that we had that hard ship date. So I was really minimizing all of the assumptions that I was making about my players with a hard ship date. It was going to be quick, so we weren't going to, if we were going to take a risk, we were going to find out really quickly if it was the wrong decision. I think that's really important to keep in mind. I think when we're making games, this is kind of how I like to think about it. You know, the more time we spend on something, the quality improves. But we kind of plateau after a little while, and our return on time investment doesn't sort of have the returns that it did. So it kind of makes sense to ship at this point, right, when our game's at its best that it possibly can be. But I think we've got to remember that all of those things before that ship date are unvalidated assumptions. So we've got heaps, and everything behind that line is assumptions that we don't know if it's worked. So it's really a risk. So if we ship here, where our game's at a good enough quality that it plays and it's reflective of what our final product is, we can minimize the assumptions and the risks that we're taking, and we can actually turn the graph into this. And there's no end to what this loop can do, right? If we're shipping earlier, then we're adding as much value and we're taking away those assumptions. So we need to get to users as soon as we possibly can. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a wide release. I think with World Vacation, we really wanted to get our game in the hands of users as quickly as possible. So we used a service called Playtest Cloud. I used this because it was going to, that basically they find game players for you. So you say, I want a player from this demographic who likes these type of games. And then you pay them a fee and they'll send your game out and record. There's screen recording technology in there, and the player will narrate their experience. So I really wanted to use this because I wanted to find a child in America that really fit our core audience. And I didn't want them to know anyone at Mighty Kingdom or anything. I wanted it to be a really clean experience. I think it's not necessary, like that's why we use this service. I think it's kind of really easy to replicate. But I do think try and find some, if you're going to do this, try and find some free-to-play users. People who sort of nominate themselves as I like mobile games, not necessarily spenders, who like games similar to your game. And if you're doing it, don't identify yourself as the developer. Don't torture them. Don't ask them questions. Just let them play and record it. So this was really good for highlighting some early usability issues. And it'll really tell us a lot about how much friction's in our first-time user experience. It'll also help us validate some broad assumptions about, like, do people like this? Does this audience like my theming? Do they like my unique selling point? They also make you feel really bad about yourself and everything that you do. But that's a kind of a secondary problem. What it's not good for is two really important things: retention and lifetime value of your user. So it's not as sustainable to go out to every one of our users and ask them to play 15 minutes a day for 5 days, and see if they spend. It's not going to happen, and it's really definitely not sustainable to get our first sort of 30 days of data, which we really need. So that's why we have to soft launch, and that's a really, really important thing, to get much more data and get a way better understanding of our market as a whole. So data science tells us that we need 1,000 users who spend in our game to really predict our lifetime value. That's how big our data set needs to be. So let's assume we're going to pay about $4 for a user. We don't want to be the first ad every time, but we want to sort of have, we're going to get some users. Let's assume we're running at about a 2% conversion for our first release. So that's going to be $88,000. And we want to sort of iterate on this a couple of times, right? So we want to sort of give ourselves 3 chances to get this right. So that's kind of our budget for soft launch. And that's really what we need to be able to predict that LTV and really plan the rest of our release. But I don't have that kind of money. And if any of you do, please come and talk to me afterwards. I would love to meet you. That's the kind of maths that the big studios do if they're going to decide to make their game release at all. I think I'm going to assume that you guys do want to release your game, that we all want to be releasing games, because that's how we learn. That's the data that we're going to get back and apply to our next release. So I think we should just pick one thing, and it's definitely retention. It's not LTV. Because it's the #1 vital sign of our game. It's the thing that really gives us a great understanding of the value that we're adding to users, at least in a time sense, in a fun sense. Do they want to spend their time? We can work on spending the money later. Let's find out if they want to stay in the game. Because if they're not in the game, we can't impact anything else. So it's the ball game. Got to go home. That being said, if you do have some budget, this is kind of how I think we should be thinking about our soft launches from a mid-sized studio level. Let's get some users from a sort of tier 2 market. High English skills, high iOS device penetration. Philippines and Mexico, traditional. Brazil is a great one too. And then just spend some money on a tier 1 release. Just something that will give you an indicator if anyone's going to spend anything at all in the game. And use multiple acquisition sources. Just don't just go to Facebook. Don't just go to search ads. Don't just use rewarded video ads. Try and find as many different sources as possible, and then attribute the installs so you can understand their unique lifetime value. You can understand how much it's going to cost you or how much you can afford to spend on a search ads user as opposed to a Facebook user. This really helps us plan a wider release. And do it as many times as you can. Apply the loop to this process as well. As many different iteration loops as we can possibly wring out of our limited budget. But the thing that we're going to find when we get to soft launch is we're going to have more users. So that means we're going to have way more data. I think the challenge is when we start thinking about how we measure our users, the best way to do it is to ask questions, like send events that ask questions of our audience. I think the mistake that I made early on in World Vacation was that I was like, I want to ask this question of the audience, but I wasn't asking questions where I had any hope of impacting the answer. So what does that mean? That's like, when do players spend money? What we actually really want to know is how do players who spend money behave differently than non-spenders? So I can understand their behavior and then impact the things around that that contribute to that spend, as opposed to just like, when does it happen? And then which levels do users fail the most? This is a classic in free-to-play and Saga linear puzzle games. But really what we needed to be asking was how badly do users fail a level? What's happening in that failure? This was kind of, yeah, so World Vacation was kind of when I really wanted to take these questions seriously and really use analytics to the absolute fullest potential as possible. And I kind of looked at the tools that we had, and I decided that we weren't going to be able to answer these questions with what we had. We're using Unity Analytics. It's a really great aggregate tool, so it tells us lots of great retention data, all of that kind of stuff. But it's really hard to segment on the fly. It's really hard to map two parameters next to each other. So we turn to Tableau and Unity raw data export. I won't go too much into that because it's sort of a bit more technical. I will say that there is a great talk. If you Google Unity raw data export, there's a Unite talk that comes up from someone who's done it before, and they sort of go into detail about it. It's really good. We used it a lot in our uptake of it. And I knew this was going to be really challenging. We didn't have anyone in the studio who had done it before, and I kind of just turned to one of our programmers and said, I need you to own this. I need you to be the analytics guy. Very fortunate that he was willing to take on that challenge and really dive deep into free-to-play. But I knew that risk was going to pay off because it gave our users a louder voice, and when we're customer-focused, it meant that we were going to have a much closer relationships with our user. But I think the point that it really paid off is in our user churn funnel. So along the top, these are our levels, and then there's a percentage of users who get through that. So users who start level 1 at our first release, only 0.5% of users were getting to level 30. And that was like bad news bears. That was really bad because the first 30 levels after that is kind of where you are exposed to a lot more content in the game. You get a better understanding of what the game's going to be. We're onboarding a lot of our mechanics at this point, and then at sort of level 30 is where you kind of take it into your own hands. But with the help of individual level cohorting, we changed it to this. This is one of our more recent versions. We've now been able to get 31% of users through the game, which is really, really good because it means that all of our efforts that we're doing in marketing are able to have a lot more value as well. So how do we do this? We ask the question, how do they fail? So we're sending things like, this is not everything that we measure per level, but the graph on the left is showing how well they beat a level, how many shots do they have when they beat a level. So if the fewer they have, the closer they almost lost that level with. And then the graph on the right is measuring previous fail attempts. So it's measuring what their sort of tolerance for failure is. So really we were able to look at this and start sort of iterating against those sort of previous, just like get them more just the like, oh, I just made it moments, or it feels achievable, so I'm going to keep going with it. I know if I've got one more, if I got those five more shots, then I'd be able to win this level, which is a monetization mechanic. So it's really important to note that the difference between our later versions, which is our blue graph, and our newer versions, which is our yellow graph, is actually 18 iterations of the loop. We launched on the 1st of June, and this is from a beginning of October release. So we just investigated every single level and kept going until we found what that sweet spot was. But we wouldn't have been able to do that without segmentation. Segmentation, sometimes called cohorting, was really, really important. And with Tableau, we were able to sort of easily, quickly visually measure the drop-off and the gain or loss of users over per version. So if we know we made a change to a level in version 1, we could then easily measure the change, the impact in level 2. But this is really important when it comes to things like player behavior and how we want to measure our users, because there's no such thing as the average user. Really, segmentation allows us to change or grab users by their behavior and treat them as separate individual groups who like certain or interact with certain different things in the game. So are spenders as an obvious one, but users who watch ads, how do they behave differently? Users who love engaging with events, how do they behave differently? So if we can really drill down on what those players are doing, we can have a better understanding of how we can add value to all of our different types of users. And then obviously segmenting by the versions helps us measure those iterations that we're making. And how do we do that? With parameters. So the parameters are what we send. We add context to the events that we're sending. And the top performers send tons and tons of events. I used a data intercepting service called Charles on one of I think it was on Gardenscapes, which is like one of the top performing free-to-play games, and they were just sending so many parameters. It wasn't just like level fail, like level name, number of shots remaining or anything like that, if they used a boost or not. It was like, it's just huge amounts of data. But I realized what was happening was that they were contextualizing the player's journey at that point. So that's what we did. So now what we do is we send heaps of common parameters with every event that we send. So we want to keep track of the current currency balance, the lifetime currency balance, if they've had any lifetime IAP purchases, the highest level they've unlocked. So they're going back, they're looking at different levels, and then their age in days. At what point are they interacting with this content? This really unlocked really important sort of pieces of the content, and really allowed us to sort of have all of the content that we're making and use it to our fullest potential. When I started segmenting by spender, we didn't do this right off the bat. So we had a kind of an issue that I was focused on. Obviously, we had the first user churn, but also in our later levels, like the users that were getting past and had that sort of higher skill level, because the levels are really hard when they first started, they were all really dropping off at level 62. We had a huge amount of churn at level 62. But I kind of made the assumption that if you're at level 62 and you're a spender, spending in free-to-play helps you progress further faster. But that was not the case. So even if you're a spender, you weren't getting value out of your spend because you weren't able to, it still wasn't helping you pass those levels. So really, it sort of allowed us to focus on what those spenders were doing and tailor the levels to their experience as well. So this is what that graph looks like now, based on lots and lots of iterations of that. When we first released the update that sort of addressed some of these users, and we started looking at segmented user bases and how we can be, and started really seriously thinking about what those particular users were doing. The following weeks, we increased our average revenue per daily user by 40%, which completely makes sense because we were giving spenders value to their spend, and we were keeping our spenders in the game. They weren't dropping off. So, you know, there's a lot that goes into free-to-play, as you can probably see. There's still heaps and heaps to think about. So I really want to sort of take what we've learned, especially with Tableau, and take it to the next level. So at the moment, we're kind of experimenting with A/B testing, like live balance testing, that we don't need to deploy an update with, and really, really shorten that iteration loop cycle. I also want to segment on device. So if I know straight away that you're playing ads, I want to tailor that experience to you and your preference for watching ads. Or I want to tailor the experience for your preference for spending, or you like this particular type of boost. And that really helps us make a game that's much more focused on the player. And live events. This is just another market example. We know live events work. We see the impact in the revenue charts when a game is really running fantastic live events. This is kind of like, it's a really deep rabbit hole, right? The minute you start thinking about free-to-play and how we can be using tons and tons of technology and observations for our users. And I think sort of what I've talked about here is it's like 7 talks, like GCAP talks. in this. But I think that they're your talks. So I'd really like to see people come away and try some of the stuff that we've talked about and what their experience was. Because we really need more people doing this. I don't want to be the only person who's like, this is all the stuff we did. And then I wanted to add impact to you guys as well. So if you do want to go away and do some of this stuff, this is what I reckon. You've got to remember to listen to the market. This is the reminders. Listen to the market, because that's going to tell you what your users want. There's no point in making a game for you. Well, there is, because you get to play it. But it's probably like the one game that you're going to make. You want to make more than one game, right? And let someone else take the risk of a crazy new adventure. Just take one small crazy new adventure, but wrap yourself in the bubble wrap of all of the proven market examples. And make sure that you do it really, really fast, so you can get in front of users and validate that assumption. And then just keep going. Support it in live operations. Keep making it better. I think one of the things that we always talk about at Mighty Kingdom is ship date is just the beginning. Life date is just the beginning. This is actually the first step on the really important journey of our customers. But most importantly, tell me about it when you do it, because I love talking about this stuff. This is where you can reach me. I'm a very intermittent Twitter user, so probably just email me. And I think also, like, I try to cover a lot. If that was too high level for you, definitely come and talk to me afterwards to get really detailed. And if it was too detailed for you, definitely come and talk to me afterwards and we can talk about it. Yeah, that's my show. Is there any questions, or everyone's good, or yeah, cool. Yeah.
So does this toss up between, release your game 80% complete, or make sure you release your game when it's really good? You mentioned that you want to get the game out there as soon as
Yeah.
possible. So how sort of
Yeah.
completion of the game?
Yeah. Well, the thing I'd point out there is you said release it when it's really good, but you don't know it's good yet. So you want to release it. I would say, like, try and spend a lot of time on your first-time user experience and really have that tutorial as tight as possible, because that's going to be how the vast majority of users interact. So if that's not working, then it's probably less valuable if that's not your sort of vision for it yet. But I think it's as soon as you have a playable, stable build. It doesn't need to be like to thousands and thousands of users. It can just be like 1 or 2 people that you know, but always just try and be talking to your end user. So if it's someone, love talking about free-to-play games with moms. So who are going to give you honest feedback, and then you can sort of go out more robust build or complete build. I think what I talk about there is there's a danger or a desire to hold on to it until it's like perfect. But we just sort of, protect ourselves by just giving it to a small group of people and coming back later. So there's no kind of right answer there. I think it's just try and be brave. That's the advice. Try and be brave with the builds that you put out. Yeah.
So there's concerns obviously when you're making free-to-play. If you're too derivative, you're not really going to acquire any of those users because the existing product already has all of them.
Yeah.
So how important would you say that the IP is in terms of...
Well, the thing about IP is that really that's just getting them through the door. You've still got to make a great game, that's what I always say. But I would like to point out here, just taking you back through a journey, that here we go. All right, so you can see here, Toy Blast, Homescapes, Candy Crush, Soda Saga, and Candy Crush are all free-to-play games. 2 of those games use candy as a theming, and then 2 more of them use toys as a theming. Homescapes have really lent in on toys. So I would actually argue that that's not a concern. That's what I was actually, and this is, please do not take this as a comment on you, but I actually think that that's us as game developers saying, because it's not my idea, therefore it's less valuable. We can see right here that people love playing games with toys in match 3. So why would we not make a game with toys in match 3? We can add our own twist to it. We can add our own sort of unique selling point to it. You know, Homescape's added the building element to it. But I actually think that there's no reason why we wouldn't do that. If anything, there's a lot of evidence that says we should do that. I think when we sort of, that's kind of what I was talking about with that, wearing that risk, right? Let them tell us what the market wants. Let the big guys make that call. And then we can really come in and use our expertise to sort of make that better. Yeah, that would be my thing there. Did that answer your question? Sorry, I get really riled up about this. I really think that, yeah, we really need to be using this information to tell us what we want. But like, you know, we can take the meta of Clash of Clans and put it on a match 3. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. There's nothing stopping us from taking the similar theme into Clash of Clans and putting it on a match 3. All of that kind of stuff, because we know that people like that theming, and we know that people like match 3s. Someone go and make that game. I want to play it. Yeah.
Are you able to discuss any specific interventions that people liked? Do you give them more free power-ups or less?
Yeah, so I did a sort of pretty, what I would describe as a janky A/B test, where I just released 2 Google Play versions simultaneously in the market. And I really wanted to investigate what the effect of reducing the amount of free currency I gave users early on was. So at the beginning of the game, you start with 210 coins, and then I released a version where I only gave them 100, which is sort of not that many. And that actually had very little impact on any metrics, so I was like really closely watching them, and we were able to segment out really easily, and there was pretty much no change in how people played. Later game players, so it did impact late-term retention slightly, because players weren't able, there was more friction to just like continuing a level or buying more lives. So that was kind of interesting. It was a nice sort of understanding of what people were valuing in the game and how quickly they wanted to make the call to spend currency. Our players love spending currency really early, which means we have a very long first time session. So we get to give them a lot in the game, like show them the game a lot early on. Yeah, which is good. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think if you're releasing a game that is sort of reliant on servers or multiplayer or asynchronous multiplayer even, spend more time in those tier 2 markets, because you can really test a lot of the robustness of your technology there. I think that other thing to measure there would be your virality and how many users bring in another user with that multiplayer. But yeah, sort of maybe even want a cheaper market to just understand how your game's going to hold up to X number of users. So I think, you know, I've given the example of Mexico and Philippines because they've got the high iOS retention, all that kind of stuff. But that still means that we're going to have to pay like 80 cents a user. There are markets that are much, much cheaper. So Pakistan is a really good one where we're going to spend a lot less on a user so we can test our robustness much, much more. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Anyone else? Cool. All right, well, come talk to me at the end if you didn't want to yell it out. That's always welcome.